it just going back to that TV connected television usage, because I was looking back at one of your newsletters before this, and I think YouTube's also overtaken ITV in the UK for share of viewing, which is
by a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's with, by the way, that's with all audiences.
Yeah.
That's not with, I mean, it's not with all audience, but it's with the total audience numbers, right? With over 35s, ITV and YouTube kind of alike are in the same numbers, but they're in the same numbers. And then, you know, when you look at 16 to 34, ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5, they're in the distant rear view mirror of YouTube.
And you've done this project with Barb recently, and we could dive into that a little bit, because one of the things that you called out is, particularly in the UK, there's a much older audience. You know, we're old over here.
Europe is super fucking old, and people don't understand, you know, what the implications of that are generationally speaking. Meaning, you know, there's, I think, you know, there's this one part of it is that your economics are going to be completely upside down in a couple of years. So there's that. Good luck. But then secondarily, just a lot of the major paradigm shifts that have taken place here haven't arrived in totality on the shores of Europe and the UK yet. And part of that is generational dynamics. There are fewer millennials and Gen Zers as a portion of the population in Europe than there is in the United States, Latin America, Asia. But secondarily is you have what you call public service media, which is a lot of free, high quality television that we just don't have here, right? And so those two things combine to delay the effects of streaming and social video in a way that haven't happened here, because we are majority under the age of 40 here, and we don't have a viable public service media. PBS, which is adorably small and wonderful, but completely underfunded, 10x less per capita on public media in the US than in the UK or any country in Europe, pretty much. So yeah, when you want to understand, well, and then there is this conundrum that people seem to not fathom, which is generations age.
Yeah.
Generations and demographics are different. Demographics are the same. 18 to 49-year-olds will always be 18 to 49-year-olds, which is that people leave that demographic. Generations age. So millennials are not children. They have children. Millennials are now 43 on the oldest end. And on the youngest end. And what were you going to say?
I was going to say Gen Beta starts next year.
That's exactly right. Generation A is turning 16 next year. Generation Z is now 26, 27. There's a Generation Z, member of Generation Z in Parliament right now in the UK. There's a Generation Z, there's a couple of Generation Zs in Congress in the United States. And, you know, so as they age, the idea that they're going to suddenly start watching BBC and Channel 4 and other public service media when they've never been relevant to them in the first place, just doesn't happen. Yeah, it doesn't seem to follow basic logic. So over the age, so for total people, I'll dig into numbers because I have them in front of me. For total people over the age of 4, the order of share of video in the home, and this is 4 screens in the home, not out of home, but 4 screens. BBC number 1 with a, you know, by a sizable number, but number 2 is YouTube. You're right. It's over ITV for total audience. Then ITV, then Netflix, then Channel 4. If you go over 35, it's BBC, ITV, then YouTube, then Channel 4. But if you go 16 to 24, the top 3 are YouTube at 28%, Netflix at 15%, TikTok at 12%, wow, and then BBC at 10%. YouTube has a larger share of video consumption in the home with 16 to 34-year-olds. So these are proper adults for the most part. A larger share of video consumption in the home than BBC, ITV, Sky, Channel 4, and Channel 5 combined.
Mad, absolutely mad. But the one thing that is very underpinning in the UK. And I say this as I'm a bit of an insider outsider in the UK, not being British, obviously. But
What are
you know,
you?
well, I'm Irish. It's a different thing. It's very different.
Okay.
Yeah.
I understand
But
that. They're two different countries, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So we could do a whole other podcast. I think
You
there probably is
you
one.
sound, you
You
speak
can do a
English.
podcast series.
Yeah. But the thing, like you guys, the Brits are super proud of public service media, super proud of the BBC. Should be the
As
Irish,
are the Irish. I mean, you all have a public service media as well.
RTE. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, RTE is pretty good, but you know, the BBC has the budgets. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
So and so does ITV and Channel 4. So I mean, there's value there, right? Like that's a good public service is a good thing, right? So I don't know, what is the answer? Should it try to evolve or should it just stop trying? I mean, you just want to. I think as kids TV producers, we always try to look for divine good, you know, in terms of the media that's being outputted, and public service is good, and not all of YouTube or TikTok is good. Let's be honest.
Well, the YouTube and TikTok aren't good or bad. You have to understand that they are agnostic. They are pipes for the most part.
People,
you know,
the internet is good and bad.
Right. The internet has no opinion. It's the people who use the internet. I posted a piece, an interview I did with SVT, which is the largest public broadcaster in Sweden, and also the most important. Like they are crushing it. One of the reasons why the BBC still has a hold in the UK is they started streaming very early on. SVT actually started earlier than BBC, and as a result, they are the largest streamed platform in Sweden, and they have a very large kids viewership as well.
Yeah.
And so, but you know, I did an interview with them recently, and they asked about their news app and their news programming, and what I said was, yeah, you're still important today, but you have to understand that like 15 years from now, when millennials and Gen Z are paying all the taxes and are running your parliament, and you go for a renewal of your media bill or your license fees, they're going to say, fuck off. I don't watch you. My kids don't watch you. You know, none of us watch you. You have no relevance with us. And yes, I would make the argument that public service media is not just good, it's crucial. There is a ton of research that demonstrates that the health of a democracy is directly correlated to the health of its public service media. This is not my opinion. This is institutional research, and over time, it's you know, when you watch a public service media crumble, you see the health of their democracy suffer as a result of that. If you want a great case study for that, I live in the United States. We have no public service media. We have no true fourth estate here. We used to. They used to be divorced. You know, there used to be a separation of church and state between the ad sales and the economics and the actual viable news and information here. That ended in the 80s. And as a consequence, you can see we elected Bedtime for Bonzo as president. Then we elected Bonzo for president. And now we don't have a sense of truth. There is no universal source of truth here. So yeah, I would argue that you really do need your public service media to evolve and transform. And I've been talking and I've been begging them to do it for years now. Put your news on YouTube. Put your content on YouTube. Like that's where your future audiences are. And you know, they sit there and they go, yeah. That's not what we do.
Well, let's just go and talk to editorial policy, that mysterious department that sits atop Broadcasting House. You get me started on that.
And the distance between that ivory tower and the reality of the world. I mean, and if you want examples, I mean, Brexit is a direct result of this discord amongst the truth and the population. The elections in Germany recently are another good example of that, where people are clearly voting against their own best interest because they don't believe the truth anymore. And that's a crisis.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, given that we've seen it play out over your side of the pond with the general election, and algorithms surfacing extremes because that's what works best. So it polarizes. Then you end up in your echo.
But you can blame the algorithms and you can blame Elon Musk all you want, which I do because he's a Bond villain. But at the same time, mainstream news and information's abdication of these platforms to the bad actors is part and parcel to the results of where we are. So, the BBC's inability to find a way to broadcast its news live on YouTube as it's being broadcast on the telly or on their app because they're not happy with the attribution ratio. So they're willing to cede all generations under the age of 35 to assholes who put false information online. The other component to this is the government itself. Here in the United States, we hold blameless YouTube and Meta and TikTok and Instagram for the content that gets put on their platforms. So Alex Jones, who is a terrible human being, and harassed the families of dead children out of their homes on YouTube, was sued and lost for $1.5 billion. You know who they couldn't sue? YouTube.
Yeah.
And so, Section 230 here, the ability to leave blameless the platforms for the content that traverses their pipes is in addition a problem. But again, don't blame the pipes, blame the legislatures, but blame the regulators, blame the decrepit, aging crypt keepers who live in Parliament and Congress who don't understand the internet.
I think it's also, and there's an aspect of it where it's about perceived interests as well. That for the BBC, there's always going to be a little bit of a question about whether having their content on YouTube, which is a private company, is something where they're kind of contributing to the success of another platform and entity. That's always going to be a bit of a
BBC. Does the BBC get carried on Sky?
It does, but there's a question.
There is no difference between those two things. There is zero difference between those two.
I can see that, but there is a question on whether the BBC, that there should be some kind of payback from Sky to the BBC. That's been debated as well. But that's the issue
when you tax every Briton for your fees. Then the construct of public service media in the UK is what it is. The fact that ITV, Channel 4, and Channel 5 don't get anything from the government and have to live on advertising blows my mind. But because they're not on equal footing to the BBC. Okay, so put that aside for a second. Y'all constructed this weird thing. And it is what it is. I mean, the BBC gets $3.2 billion from the government or from the taxes of UK citizens every year. And then they generate another $2.5 billion in commercial revenues from the content they create using the revenues they get from the public. So cry me a river. I don't really get
I'm not arguing against against any of that stuff. I'm just saying they're a perceived interest rather than it being a regulatory thing that drives the BBC's aversion to getting kind of all in with YouTube.
No, it's an outdated point of view. There is no rational argument to be made for not putting at least the news. Forget everything.
I completely agree with that. But it's kind of I worked at Nickelodeon when Nickelodeon was suing YouTube because they didn't want any of their content on YouTube.
Also, equally dumb.
But I'm just saying, for me, it's kind of the equivalent. The BBC's position there isn't that different from Viacom's position.
The difference it is and it isn't. In that, at least Viacom had an economic rationale. You're stealing my content, and therefore, I'm a commercial entity. The BBC has zero economics to lose by putting their content on YouTube. Zero. There is no economic disincentive for putting their content on because they don't make any money off of the distribution or the size of the market.
They don't. But I think there's still some kind of motivating psychology behind that makes it difficult for the BBC.
I think they need to see a therapist. Though.
Yeah, I think we'd probably all agree with that.
Yeah, no, I agree too, because I think if you asked any license fee payer that's got young kids if they would care whether their license fee partly went towards putting content on YouTube, they wouldn't give a fig. And one of the pillars of the BBC with regards to its children's content is to reflect their lives back at them, both in content, but hey, reflect it back in the places where they're also hanging out too. So I think
that's exactly right. And again, this is the confounding part of it is that there's this argument that runs in the halls of all public service media, and I've talked to public service media in at least a half a dozen countries about this, that would be cannibalistic, that it'll steal audience from the broadcast or our app. That is wholly and provably untrue. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you a case study. Channel 4, I will say, based a little bit on conversations I had with them in the last year, they moved more and more of their premium long form content to YouTube. And guess what? It's not duplicative. Hey, and here's another thing. They're making money they did not used to make. And then there's the argument of, well, YouTube takes such a big portion of those revenues. I'm like, how many of those revenues are you getting when you put nothing in?
Yeah. And like the same applies to kids too, right? Like we see this. This is like literally franchise strategy 101. Get your stuff everywhere. Obviously be strategic about it. Don't just flood everywhere all in one go. Right. Like get your pieces of the pie, get your chunks of revenue along the way. But ultimately, the way you make the most money in kids is to get the most kids loving your content. And doing that means...
The analogy between satellite and cable television is direct. You eventually got around to putting it up on Sky. This is the same thing, only way more important. Because in the case of Sky, there was only going to be a certain percentage of the population that was ever going to pay for television, right? Very, very slim. Although now, guess what? A huge portion of the UK ecosystem pays for Netflix. And Disney, by the way. So that attitude has changed. But on the other side of it, YouTube is free for the most part. And although they have 100 million paying subscribers on premium worldwide. But the crucial element here is like this is far more important because it's going to be a much larger share of both the adult and the younger generational audience on a moving forward basis. And the BBC public service media in every territory, their entire currency is relevancy.
Yep. That's
it. And once you run out of that, shit's going to go really wrong for you and your society.
I think we all kind of agree on how public service media needs to evolve. And I know that you've been and you've spoken to the senior leadership, you've spoken to the head honchos at the BBC. Let's hope they listen. I liked your a line in one of your newsletters about embracing it, and YouTube is your broadcast partner and TikTok is your marketing machine.
That's exactly right.
That could so work for BBC Children's.
And what's fascinating is because of the generational lag and because of the traditional ecosystem there, you've avoided a decent portion of the media apocalypse that is crashing everything down in the United States. And you have the opportunity to circumnavigate it completely if you're in public service media. But you have to choose to do those things because otherwise the tsunami that has subsumed the corporate media industrial complex in the United States will take you all down with it.
How cheery.
Well, I wish I could look out the window. Shit's on fire, man. Like it's like, oh, you're always so dour and apocalyptic when you're in your prognostications and your analysis of the media ecosystem. Like, yeah, no, shit's on fire. Like, I can't, what do you want me to do? Like, that's just the way it is. And it's way more on fire than it was a month ago.
I feel like we could insert the meme here of, the dog sat in the burning house.
Everything's fine.
Everything's fine.
Put it in post.
Everything's fine, yep.
Coming back to a bit of sports, because I'm consulting for a few sports leagues and rights holders. And it's interesting again, you know, they tend to be a little bit behind entertainment in how they're embracing YouTube. You know, going back to what you said about very often in the past about subscription fatigue, churn rates, you know, a lot of sports rights holders, particularly over here, you know, they realized that broadcast media rights were in decline, and then they set up single sport OTT platforms. And I don't see a huge future for them, again, given young people's consumptions, given how many fandoms they have. They like more sports than ever before. We're really not going to see the growth of single sport OTT. Am I right?
I think it depends on the sport. I mean, I think if the NFL decided to take all its rights back and create a single sport OTT, I think it would do quite well. You know, I think if Premier League decided to do that, and they're not one of the ones you're talking about, are they?
No, I wasn't thinking of anyone. It was just more the shift away from.
I mean, I think if Premier League decided to do that, and I think if NFL decided to do that, I think if FIFA that decided that they were going to take everything off of you know, television and make a streamer out of it every 4 years, then you know, women's soccer as well, women's football as well. I think but that's it.
Yeah,
there are very, like, the NBA couldn't do. I don't think the NBA could do that.
No,
and why would they? I mean, they're getting such great economics, you know, from their licensing partners right now. But yeah, I think there's a limitation to the number of subscriptions, and I think that there are exceptions to that. I think that, you know, the Tour de France could create. I mean, they do very well here as a premium product, but you have to charge so much. You know, you can't charge a little bit there, and it's based on the size of your audience. So, you know, but then you go to India and you look at Indian Premier League cricket. That would never work as a premium subscription, because that's just not how that country works. As evidenced by Disney's epic failure there, and Netflix's epic failure in India as well. And now Reliance is basically the only television operator left in India. And so, you know, I think, you know, it depends on the sport, and it depends on the market, and it depends on the fandom. You know, I don't, but then you look at things like World Poker Tour, which does really well as a fast channel and a YouTube channel. So it's the things I like to say about this next era, about the user-centric era, is that the solutions are as diverse as the audience's habits. You know, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to a lot of these things. Like, people are like, oh, well, you know, what's the answer? Like, tell me the problem and tell me which specific company is looking to solve it, and tell me about their audience, and then I can help you figure it out. But, like, if you just want me generally to solve everything in, you know,
one go,
and of this elevator ride, like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's funny. I think, Joe, like, there are single IP streamers on the kids side as well. And I know that I have gone now 6 months without raising Tractor Ted, which I think is a new record for me. But you know what I mean? Like that, like there is that super nicheness. Tractor Ted, Evan, might not be familiar, is like really specific IP for little boys of a certain age, just love tractors. Like tractors. Yeah, and it's,
I get it. I've never seen it.
It's quite a joyous little show.
My kids are super old too, so like I haven't watched kids. I don't watch kids programming. I consume it in that I understand about it, but I don't. It's been many years, thank God, since I've had to watch.
Yeah, but it's when you get that niche like correct, and so there is spaces for it to fit in. But obviously, there's also a lot of folks who are just saying, "Oh, well, just do this. I'll just go over the top myself." You know, and think that dragging an audience to an app is easier than, you know, is an easy thing.
Yeah, what the world wants is not more apps.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting thing with YouTube as well. That aside, it harks back to talking about the solution fitting the problem, because I think you'll see offshoots of sports begin to consider YouTube as their primary platform. So you've got the Kings League, which is South American Soccer League, and big in Spain too. You've got the Baller League, which was in Germany, that's just launching in UK and US. And I mean, it's
La Liga is crushing it as well. But that's, you know, think about that for a second. You know, half the world's population speaks Spanish. So like it really is case by case, audience by audience, fandom by fandom, IP by IP. But I will say this, as diverse and kind of asymmetrical as all these solutions are to all of these issues for all of these audiences and all of this intellectual property, there is a solution for every piece of intellectual property. It's about fandom to a certain extent, meaning take your content, find your audience, build a cult. Cults are really good businesses. Just ask Donald Trump. And the idea is that you have to find people who are so in love with your intellectual property that the economics build around that passion. We've moved from audience to community. We've moved from scale to passion. Those are the new economic trade winds in this new ecosystem. And if you're not prepared to adapt to them, that's okay. Go sell real estate, because that's the one thing they're not making any more of is land.
That's an excellent point. I remember, 20 years ago when I started in my career, we could very much dictate the rules of engagement with the audience. It was command and control.
They had no
Emily
choice.
ran the scheduling. I ran the style guide. I approved every piece of marketing, every product packaging. And that's just no longer possible now.
No,
the command and control era is over.
Because we went from an era where people had no choice to now they have infinite choice. And by the way, we all facilitated that. We kept adding channels and adding subscriptions and making way, way, way too much content. And then we built these platforms, and we built the roads. Now people are crashing into light poles and they're like, what happened?
Emily, sorry, I interrupted you then.
No. I was just laughing at people crashing into light bulbs.
It's
my
hysterical.
sadistic side.
I was going to talk about kids' content and kids' media that you've loved, past, present, and future, because we always ask our guests, what did you love as a kid? What was your favorite kids' content? What are you impressed with now, and what are you looking forward to? It doesn't necessarily have to be kids' content, but
Yeah, I mean, the kids' content I loved. I mean, I was the first Sesame Street generation, and so obviously there was a love for that and Mr. Rogers and things like that. But the content that the kids' content that I really loved and still do love is always the one that has the joke for the kids and the joke for the adults. So Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Tom and Jerry. I mean, everything I learned about jazz and classical music and comedy, I learned from Bugs Bunny and Tom and Jerry. And then you fast forward to the SpongeBob SquarePants, which my kids grew up on, and Fairly Odd Parents, and you look at Rick and Morty, which is not really kids programming in any way, shape, or form. But I do think I always love the kids' content that doesn't condescend, that doesn't talk down to the kids, but actually appreciates that they have a level of intelligence that is going to evolve. And the shows that have longevity, I think, are the ones that allow the audience to evolve and continue to be interested in that content. What I fear and what I'm afraid of is our inability to make news interesting to people under the age of 25 anymore. And that to me is a real danger. And I think if we can do anything as a society and as people who care about the kids that we're raising, is to find a way to lean into the platforms that they're using to create news programming that speaks to them. And when you look at legitimate news journalists who are on TikTok, and yes, there are legitimate news journalists.
Oh, yeah.
They know exactly how to make the news interesting for the audience that they're speaking to. And that to me is the clarion call to those of us in the professional media world who give a shit about the world that we're living in.
We had a journalist from the News Movement, which is a TikTok news agency on here, and so fascinating and so brilliant. Every single one. I met the sports journalist. We had the current affairs one, and they were so cool. Again, when I think back to the BBC, I think, if they could just embrace that, I think it would be so important, given that Newsround is still played almost daily in a lot of UK school classrooms, right? But
that's exactly right.
Well, we've hit the hour.
Yes, we have. This was great.
Great. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Evan.
Do you play
Super
that
interesting.
music at the end too?
We do.
Yeah,
Yes.
Andy, you do your sign off. You're so good at it.
Okay. So thanks very much, Evan, and thanks very much to our audience for listening. Hope you've gained some insights and we've helped make a bit of sense of the media landscape at the moment. Please tune in to us next week and we'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks.